I'm Amitabh Ghatak. I do a lot of product development work at William Hill with a focus on mobile. All right, let's talk about mobile market share, right? I don't know if this has already been discussed, but I think it's an interesting insight that when you read these Kantar reports and Q3 device sales and you see Android 80% market share and Windows Phone climbing up at 9%. Keep in mind, it's very important to understand that these are the last quarter device sales. Android's been around for a while, iOS even longer. So if you look at an interesting metric, that if you want to target your mobile applications and your mobile products, it's important to understand what your install base is. And your install base kind of reflects your internet usage. So if you are thinking of targeting various different platforms, it's important to understand the distinction between device sales in the previous quarter and what that your current user base looks like. The current user base is a snapshot of what it is today. Device sales is more where the market is trending in some time. It's important to get that distinction in mind. Revenue-wise, iOS is still the market leader, as you could see in the previous graph. Android is up and coming. We all know that. It's not a big, mystery. Windows Phone, up and coming. 9% of UK device sales in Q3. Still 3.5% of install base. But if niche segment is what you're targeting, then Windows Phone is an interesting proposition. Also, I think Microsoft is probably the closest to that unified operating system across mobile devices, tablets, and desktop operating systems. It's not far when you already see these Microsoft systems running Windows 8 and 8.1 and so on. So, is there merit in targeting Windows Phone outside that 3.5%? Quite possibly, because the future might be that you have one operating system. iOS and Mac and OS X are slowly converging. You can see it in the kind of feature set available. You can see it in the design, and in all probability, over the next year or two, it might just so happen that iOS and OS X might get merged. Regarding hardware, the mobile industry is kind of going through a PC-type phase, which is 5 years back. Nobody really cares about the CPU megahertz that you have. Nobody cares about the RAM that you have. It's commoditized. It's becoming commoditized, and it's not really a significant difference between, one device provider to the other. And where it becomes interesting is in the software and the apps that you guys create and write and sell to your customers. And that's where BlackBerry is failing, is because they have a decent enough operating system in terms of BlackBerry OS. The catch is nobody wants to write software for BlackBerry OS. It's a dead and dying market. So I'm going to stick my neck out and give a small prediction. I don't know whether this is actually the case, but if you think about BlackBerry and its strengths in terms of enterprise services and encryption and so on, I think BlackBerry would find it hard-pressed not to release an Android version with its enterprise services baked into it. And that very possibly could happen, and corporates love it. CTO, CIO love BlackBerries with all the kind of feature sets that it gives. So that actually might come. And an interesting note, I don't know if you guys know, actually you can run Android apps on the BlackBerry operating system. You can do a small little conversion, and it runs by default on BlackBerry OS. They actually have a Google Play client for BlackBerry OS that you can actually connect into Google Play, download an app, and get it into your device. So that's a couple of interesting things happening in that operating system market space. HTML5. Everybody knows it. Everybody probably got a product for it. Does anybody know when HTML5 was released? Anybody? Ballpark? 4 or 5 years ago? Anybody else? HTML5? HTML5 spec was finalized 2 weeks ago. It's a pain in the ass because, it was constantly changing. It's hard to write to, right? As a former developer, I can tell you how hard it is to write to HTML5. and especially with different compatibility levels across different operating systems. This is HTML5 test. If you haven't used it, use it. It'll give you a very interesting insight into the benchmarks that your device currently supports. It's out of a scale of 500. If you see Android 2.3 over there, it's 187 out of 500. So that's limiting what you can do with HTML5. And Android 2.3, as probably know, is still 18% of global market share of Android. iOS is significantly better in terms of version support and version upgrades, but Android's still lagging significantly in terms of market uptake to the latest version. I'll come back to that in just a bit, but that's Android. That's a native browser, the default browser. You have Chrome, you have iOS, and Windows Phone. So when you make decisions on version support, both at an operating system level and a browser level, it's important to understand what you're building towards and what you want to do. If you want the latest and greatest stuff, chances are that the bottom row is not going to cut it for you. So you may not even want to support those operating systems in terms of Windows Phone 7, which is a ridiculous 26 on the HTML5 test score. And HTML 5.1 and 5.2 are in draft versions, so expect that soon and cater for it should you choose to. Just touching a little bit on the OS operating system fragmentation. You might have heard of this in the Android fragmentation problem. And you look at Android and the latest version, I don't know if you can see it, KitKat, which is version 4.4, which is the latest one, is on just over 30% of devices so far. And that was released a year back. That's a massive time. So if you want to write applications that are, catering to the latest features of, the operating system platform, right? You have to be really, really careful about what segment you're targeting. As I mentioned earlier, Gingerbread, that's Android version 2.3, still 18% of the market. Are you willing to forego 18% of market share to build a great app? Right? That's a question that you constantly need to be asking yourself. iOS, significantly better. You'll notice the uptake on iOS is significantly faster. iOS 8 got released September. Within 1 month, it was at 48% and at that inflection point. For Apple, that's a pathetic number. That is pathetic. iOS 6 to iOS 7, you had within 1 month, 80% of people were using iOS 7, sorry. So actually, that's poor performance for Apple, but historically, they've been really, really good at supporting your devices and making sure you have the latest operating system on your device so that any cool features you want to build for it, most people will be able to use it, as opposed to Android. And that's a key takeaway in terms of what audience you want to target. I think I said that before, supporting older versions are a pain. Mobile web, in general, we try to use as a catch-all for all devices. It's a catch-all, it says it'll work on most of your devices. It's a pain to manage, it's a pain to support. You may not get the latest features and so on, but that's your catch-all, right? Especially your catch-all, right? Especially in our industry, gambling within the App Store and Google Play, you don't know what could happen if you build a native app. So in our industry, HTML5 and mobile web and so on, you almost certainly need to do that. Hypothetically, should Apple say, gambling apps, we're not so sure anymore, and pull it off the App Store, you always have something to fall back to. People who rely on a very native strategy, there's an inherent risk, and also you can't target app stores like Google Play, which doesn't allow gambling in the first place. Apps, on the other hand, is where you can make your differentiator. You can make the coolest apps, leverage the best platform features, and so on. And here you can make perhaps some harder choices in terms of how much compatibility you want to give to that platform. In general, we try to follow a version X and a version X minus 1. So the current version is iOS 8. Within the apps, if there are choices, so far we haven't had to make some of these choices, but in a certain case, we have had to make these choices, and we make these choices fairly straightforwardly. Hey, iOS 6, if we have to support it, it's going to be a pain to build on iOS 8 and so on, screw it, drop to support. And it's, again, the hard choices. Do you want to give up 10% of market share to gain 20% of market share to leverage the best features, right? Again, it depends from business to business, but a choice. And in general, automatically, 2 to 5%, if that operating system version or browser version is below 2 to 5%, drop it. It's not worth the headache. You will stifle your creativity and you will stifle your application development if you continue to try to support that long tail. When faced with a choice, don't. Okay, I'm really putting my geek hat on. A lot of you may have heard this term called APIs. These are application programming interfaces. It's basically two pieces of software trying to interact with each other. And this is the important point. Without needing to know what's under the hood of each of these software pieces. This is as simple as I could get it. Get me temperature, right? And my parameter is London, right? And just return me what the temperature is. Now, how you got to getting that temperature, you used Yahoo's weather service or Google's weather service or picked it out of your magic hat. The requester of that information doesn't care, right? And that's the beauty of APIs, is that you allow two systems to have a contract between each other, allowing them to communicate without needing to know what's under the hood. Your APIs, if they're efficient, versioned, well-documented, and testable, unlocks a world of potential that you could probably not do in-house. It enables you to go to your third-party developers, go to your third-party sources, enables people in-house to just fool around with certain aspects of the back-end services that you're providing and say, hey, actually, we're William Hill, we know betting inside out. Well, actually, there's some bedroom developer on the other side of the road who says, I have a great betting concept that you guys just don't have. And how do you leverage that quick innovation? APIs is a key part of it. Last couple of slides, hybrid. There's a native versus HTML5 debate yesterday. I wasn't there, but I'm sure it was a lively one. It's been going on for the last 3-4 years in the mobile space, probably the last 10 years in the desktop space, where you can have hybrid embed web pages within apps and submit it to the App Store. So that's a quick, easy way to get in the App Store and monetize your products, especially if you already have a mobile website built. And what you can do effectively is have component pieces that are reusable and flexible. These are 4 apps in the App Store. We have 2 of our product owners sitting at the back over there. It's Live Casino, Vegas, Casino, and Casino Club. Now, each of these apps submitted to the App Store, if you can see that there are similarities, but there are differences in terms of the header, in terms of footer, and so on. Each of these apps submitted to the App Store required 0 lines of code change. If you build it in a configurable, flexible manner that you allow your freedom to get out of the developers and into the product management, into the analysts, into the business owners of the world, where you can be creating apps without actually having to know how to write code. And that's the beauty of a componentized standard model that allows you to do exactly that. Again, assets configurable, you can download them on the fly, you can change configurations on the fly, and allows you a lot of flexibility. And I'm not going to go into what we want to do next, but it's an interesting proposition that's worked fairly well. And if you solved it all, and you think you're masters at app development and products and so on, there are a couple of other things that you can look at. Something called Android forks. Of course, you have Android as a regular operating system, but if you use the Kindle Fire, that runs something called Fire OS. And AOSPs, it's essentially the Android open source project, right? So you can go and build your own version of Android, but you just don't get services like Google, the Google apps and Google Play and all of these things. You can download it on the site, but they don't come baked in by default. So if you're really enthusiastic about really creating a custom Android platform, Android open source project is your good friend. Fire OS is run by Amazon. Xiaomi, people heard of Xiaomi? It's number 1 or number 2 seller in China. And it's interesting because a year and a half back, they were nowhere, absolutely nowhere. And their business model is interesting because they said, well, we're actually just taken Android open source, create our own little Play Store, and now they supplanted Samsung as the number 1 manufacturer of devices in China. And their business model is not to make money on your devices. It's to make money on the App Store. It's to make money on buying emoji icons. It's about, generating revenue everywhere outside the device itself, which is why they sell it for super cheap. Xiaomi is another China. It's popular in Asia and stuff like that. Google Play, gambling apps not allowed on Google Play. Tough break for all of us. If it happens one day, fantastic. App stores are a great potential for organic customer acquisition. But should you get restricted by Google Play, you have alternative app stores that are very happy to take your apps. GetJar, AppsLib, SlideMe, OneMobile, and Mobile9 are all pretty popular. These things, and well, of course, you have the people who don't really pay for their apps also uploading apps there. So it's a good free pirated site as well. So if you're feeling cheap, you might want to head on there. So in the absence of Google Play, you can always download the Android app from your mobile site. And you can also put it on one of these app stores. If you really run out of things to do, niche OSs. We talked about Windows Phone penetration. Another interesting thing about Windows Phone is that you have an army of developers itching to have a great operating system with a decent enough market share. I occasionally yearn for the times when there was a Windows monopoly, and you just had to write for one platform, 95% market share. They're all people dying to build apps for Windows Phone, but can't, because nobody has the inclination to do it for a 3.5% market share. Yes. And we already talked about BlackBerry OS and its possible compatibility with. I'll just go on to demos. Just a few interesting tidbits that you could probably get from some of these apps. Most of you have probably seen a lot of these features, but it's something that you guys need to think about in terms of how you might leverage for your own set of products. All right, the first one is called WebView. It's just a test app, but these are just like little tips. This probably won't work, but if you see UI WebView and WK WebView, again, I don't mean to geek out, but it's just an example of technological changes that are happening within the operating system. iOS has it, Android has it in 4.4. WebViews are something you use for hybrid apps. You embed the web page into your app and put it into the App Store. And you only had UI WebView, which was excruciatingly slow. But in iOS 8, there's WK WebView. It's 4 times faster, and you'll see a massive performance difference should you implement WK WebView in your hybrid apps. So it's one of those kind of platform innovations that you might want to think of. CPU utilization significantly less, battery life, and so on. If you have hybrid apps, I strongly recommend you give this. What else? Beacons, iBeacons. People heard of iBeacons and stuff like that? Yeah? This is a beacon. It's a little device. Now it actually comes in significantly smaller sizes that you can actually stick on the wall, stick somewhere. And this is nothing but a Bluetooth transmitter. And it only conveys one piece of data, which is its ID. It's based on something called BLE, which is Bluetooth Low Emission. Bluetooth Low Emission. And these beacons are interesting. People from Skybet here? Anybody Skybet? They've actually done some interesting things, and they put these little beacons in football stadiums. And what it does is it's constantly transmitting a little ID that says, I'm so-and-so. That's all it does. The intelligence is all in your apps to recognize what that ID is and what you can do with it. We actually did a test run at Cheltenham this year where you could walk into the Cheltenham pub, and if you had the William Hill app, we had beacons set up inside it, and if you had the William Hill app, you get a free pint. Not significantly profitable in any shape or form, but it's just a kind of trialing of technology and what with it. And I'll just show you a little demo app over here. This is made by a company called Estimote. You have a lot of beacon providers. It has a lot of relevance where people are actively looking for data in terms of retail. You walk into a particular section in a retail store. Have you guys seen Minority Report where Tom Cruise walks into Gap and suddenly says, "Hey, Mr. whatever his name was, Tom Cruise, welcome back to the Gap. We have this in your size," and so on. It's upstairs to your left, right? So beacons are an interesting proposition. If you go to museums, a lot of museums are now beacon enabled. So actually you're walking around, and as you're going from place to place, you're in front of the Mona Lisa, you're in front of Rodin or whatever it is, and it's context switching your apps in order for you to get relevant information based on your micro location. Some people have a term for it now. It's called nearables, and it's replacing kind of NFC, which, does anybody know the full form of NFC? It's nobody fucking cares. So it's an important thing, right? NFC was touted as this kind of, we'll put this phone here and we're going to get context information. Nobody used it. Everybody hated it, right? Even Apple Pay doesn't allow NFC usage. We've all seen Touch ID in some shape or form. But I'd just like to quickly touch upon Touch ID in terms of its authentication. So it has my fingerprint registered and does something or the other. All right. So it's important to think about Touch ID not just as a login mechanism, but it's important to think about it as a shift in paradigm from that upfront, hey, please log in to continue, to a more transaction-based model, right? That doesn't rely on upfront authentication. It actually says, well, you do whatever you have to do within the app. You want to place your bets, play some slots, and so on. But when it actually comes to a monetary transaction, that's where Touch ID will be useful. So you can actually defer that entire login process from where it is now, which is mostly at the beginning, right to the end where you're actually striking that bet. So it's important to think of a bit of a paradigm shift when it comes to going from that upfront model to a transaction-based model. Shazam uses something called audio triggers. And you must have seen those TV ads that says Shazam for more information. Again, this is context information. You have Shazam running. It listens to what's currently playing and throws you out to a place where you get relevant information, what that show is, who the actors are, what the background music is, and so on. Right? So these are audio triggers that are available in your operating system should you choose to leverage it. One of the companies I met some time back actually gamified some of this at a rock festival. They had the app, and you could go to various kind of places, check in, using audio triggers. I'm at this location, and if you got to all check-ins, you got something along those lines. The question I asked them was, it's a rock festival. How do you distinguish the sounds that are coming in and recognize that this particular pattern was for your app? Well, actually, human frequencies between a particular range, and devices can transmit and detect ultrasonic frequencies. So if there's audio triggers that you want to have in your app, you don't actually even need to listen to it. It's actually just there. It's baked into your audio transmission. The last thing I want to talk about was this app called Cluster. It's not a particularly popular app or anything of the sort. It's private social networking. But what it does really well is in terms of intelligently timing your requests in the app. Now, what does that mean? A lot of apps you've seen, the moment you start, it says, can I send you push notifications? Can I access your camera? Can I access your contacts and so on? And actually, you just want to get into your app, to the app that you downloaded and see what the hell's going on, right? And most people by default say no. You know what? I'll go back to it if I can, or if I even want to. Right? And coming back to it is a pain. Nobody really does that. You've lost significant traction should that user say, well, I'll come back to you. And what does that mean in terms of intelligently timing it? Only request access when you really, really need to do it, and where the user is primed to saying yes. So notice it hasn't actually asked me for anything yet. But you notice the results. Show results from your iPhone contacts. I actually want to add somebody from my iPhone contacts. That's when the notification comes up. When you're taking a photo, that's the time to request access to the camera. When you want to upload a photo, that's the time you want to request access to your camera roll. And these are the kind of few tips and tricks that will make your mobile experience significantly better to use, and customers will love you more for it. I mean, I could go on. There are a couple of other interesting things in terms of how you use vibration in your phone. Something called haptics. If you're playing a slot and you get a big jackpot win or something, how do you use the vibration mechanics on the phone to actually give a marginally better experience? Some of the operating systems have something called background data, where it allows you to actually get small pieces of information while your app is in the background. So the moment the guy opens up his app, it's actually refreshed with a whole bunch of data that normally would have taken a significant amount of time. Right? So, few tips and tricks, a little bit of data, a little bit of demos, and that's about it. Thank you.